Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Jafar Hassan. Located at the crossroads of Europe, Asia and Africa, Türkiye is known for playing a key role in mediation efforts when needed. In the past years, Ankara has hosted talks to calm tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia and worked to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia. And just last week, the country coordinated what is being called the biggest post-Cold War prisoner swap between rival world powers. The exchange took place in Ankara between Russia and the US, but also involved Germany and 3 other nations. The deal, orchestrated by the Turkish intelligence for over a year, saw a swap of 24 prisoners, with over half of them from Russia to the West. Among those released were US journalist Ivan Gershkovich and Vadim Krasikov, reportedly a Russian security agent. While US President Joe Biden celebrated the deal as a feat of diplomacy and friendship, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said the country will continue to utilize diplomacy for peace. Of course, the exchange comes as tensions between Moscow and Washington have soared in the past months over Russia's war on Ukraine. Earlier this year, Ankara announced it was ready to once again host peace talks between the warring sides. And for more on Ankara's contribution to the historic prisoner swap, joining me from Washington, D.C. is former U.S. diplomat William Lawrence, and from Oslo, Glenn Dyson, a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. Gentlemen, great to have you here with us on a Straight Talk. Professor William, let me begin with you. How do you think this prisoner swap operation, prisoner exchange operation, reflect on Turkiye's current standing in international diplomacy?
Well, it certainly generated a lot of commentary here in Washington, and very much positive, because, as you know, for years now, the U.S. has had a relationship with Turkey that's sort of on again, off again, essential, but questioning, loyalties and that sort of thing, or not necessarily loyalties, but alignments. And Turkey made the case here that good relations with Russia not only helped with the Ukraine war and the Turkish intervention in terms of the grain shipments and all of the maritime aspects of this and some of the geostrategic aspects, but here is a perfect case where a good relationship with Russia helped create the most complex and largest prisoner swap probably in the modern era. And so, 8 countries involved, and, without Turkey, this wouldn't have happened. And Turkey was not only the main mediator, but the main locale, as it was at times during the Cold War, of the actual exchange. And so there was a slew of articles that came out from the think tanks and the press in Washington saying, well, look at this relationship with Turkey, and look how important it was to this momentous exchange. And maybe we should think again about Turkey's relationship with Russia, because it actually serves the U.S. in situations like this.
So, Professor Dyson, certainly this was a successful diplomatic operation. And I want to ask you here, how do you think this successful mediation by Türkiye is going to affect its future role when it comes to resolving crises and conflicts?
Well, I think it's going to be very helpful to set up Türkiye as a future negotiator, because a key problem we've had in Europe over the past 3 years is it's the disappearance of neutrality. Again, since Cold War, we used to have a belt of neutral states going down throughout Europe. And well, what we've seen is neutrality has largely disappeared. And we instead have this huge now demand for bloc loyalty and obedience. And unfortunately, a lot of the demand for bloc loyalty has been to align with this very anti-Russian policies. One can only look to Viktor Orban's efforts to promote peace and the diplomatic, advanced diplomatic relations between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and how he has been punished by the EU. So it's quite fascinating that Turkey has really gone forward here and stuck its head out. And I think it's been quite successful, because usually the first instinct in the collective West is to punish anyone who deviates. But as we see, Turkey has been a very important actor now in terms of managing a peace or getting this agreement together. And it's not just this isolated agreement. We have to also look moving forward, because when this war comes to an end, we need someone to help to negotiate. And even though Turkey is a NATO member, it's nonetheless seen more favorably by the Russians as opposed to any of the other NATO members. So I think this is Turkey's an effort that has been making for quite a few years, which is it doesn't want to link itself only to one center of power. It wants to diversify, because only by being able to have independent policies towards all the major powers can it act as a truly independent center of power in a multipolar world. And I think it's quite obvious that Turkey has been successful at this.
Right. Now, Professor Lawrence, the inclusion of notable figures like Vladimir Kara-Murza in the prisoner swap has certainly caught international attention. I wonder, what message does this send regarding Turkiye's influence over major countries, major superpowers, over countries with strong leaders?
Well, it's interesting that, and building off what the professor just said, it's interesting that the main storyline on that in Washington has been, oh, look how the German prime minister was loyal to Biden in allowing this swap to happen, and getting back to that sort of bloc mentality, when in fact it wasn't just that Germany made a concession, but that this deal got much bigger, much more profound, much more impactful for the two sides because of the complexity of it. And again, that could have only happened with Turkey's intervention. And so it's not only a story of German loyalty to the West and to the bloc, but of the Turkish reaching out. If I could add one point, I mean, Turkey's also done a great job in last years of sort of reverting back to what it used to have of this, what they called something like the no enemies policy, that Turkey has established that it's good to have good relations in every direction. And it's leaning very much in that direction and setting an example for everybody else. Because, as the professor said, smaller powers may often have to or may have pressures to align to, be within sort of neo-imperial or hegemonic structures. But larger powers often have to have good relationships outside of these blocks and outside of these lines in order to have the best, not just geopolitical relations, but economic relations and all the other types of relations that are helpful. I would say that a lot of this is, if not transactional, each country has to look at its own needs and its own strengths. And I don't think Turkey's been following any playbook here, but rather it's been looking for ways in which it can advantageously for Turkey and for its region, do good things, rather than simply align or simply buck trends, to make a point about neutrality. I'm not saying that the professor's wrong on neutrality, but I'm saying that there's a certain amount of pragmatism here, which is very helpful as well.
Professor Dason, let me come to you. Do you think this policy is something that other countries, especially in the region, should follow as well?
Well, I think many countries are following this pathway, because in the West, we were still, I think, very much stuck in this bloc mentality a little bit from the Cold War. When you see this often with the rhetoric in terms of trying to interpret what Turkey is doing. So is it aligning with NATO, or is it going to the Russians? Is it going to China? So it's always this assumption that the countries have to subordinate themselves to one bloc. But if we see what Turkey is doing, you also see similar actions by, for example, Saudi Arabia. They're always wondering, well, which side will they lean towards? We ask the same about India. Why aren't they loyal to us? Are they loyal to the Russians? So we're always looking for what bloc they should align themselves with. But again, this is the emergence of a multipolar world. And there's some opportunities in a multipolar world in terms of medium-sized countries and also larger can play more of an independent pole of power. But what you have to do when you want to be an independent pole of power, you have to diversify your partnerships, political, economic, security, because if you only link yourself to one center of power, which is more powerful than you, you would lose a lot of political sovereignty. Look at what's happening to Europe now. It's cutting itself off from many centers of the world and becoming, as many recognize, excessively dependent on the US. So I think what Turkey is doing, Saudi Arabia, India, I think this is what you will see more of moving forward, as this block mentality is simply not in the interest of these smaller countries, or sorry, not even small, medium-sized countries who don't want to necessarily only display block loyalty and instead find their own position in the world. So it's always going to be some pragmatism, but it's also about pursuing national interest. And I think Turkey has an interest in having good relations with the US, Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese. And in the process, it can also have a helpful role in the international system to promote peace, as we now see.
Right. Now, Professor Lawrence, talking about the past, now certainly Turkey played a significant role when it comes to mediating the grain corridor deal and finding a resolution to the Second Karabakh War. I wonder, do you think Turkey's model of mediation can be considered a template for other regions, for other nations rather, or are there unique aspects that only Turkey can leverage?
I think there's some of both, because there's aspects of Turkish history, Turkish culture, Turkish geopolitical, geostrategic positioning that are unique to Turkey, right? And there's the way that Turkey's going to go about things and historic relationships and approaches to things that Turkey has that other countries can maybe learn from, but not necessarily photocopy or, emulate that directly. But certainly there's mechanisms here of mediation and mechanisms of positioning that do transcend Turkey's uniqueness, that are useful. Let me add here also that the bloc mentality is not necessarily just a pathology or a routine or a reflex that the West is having a problem with. The bloc approach has reemerged because of Russia's own approach to blocs and its own invasion of Ukraine, because Ukraine wasn't acting in a way that was loyal enough to the old Soviet bloc, which is very much the reconstruction of which, what motivates Putin. And let me also say that, again, building off what the other professor said, in a multipolar world, there might be sort of two ways to go about it. There's a multipolar world where everybody's sort of an independent actor more and more. And there's also a multipolar world where you have blocks, right? Where you could have not just 2 blocks, but 3 blocks or 4 blocks or more blocks, and regional blocks as opposed to, let's say, global blocks, and then cross-regional, the BRICS type thing.
Professor William Lawrence and Professor Glenn Dyson, thanks very much for joining me today here on A Straight Talk.